look at the Common Core standards for English. The lead writers were David Coleman and Susan Pimentel, and both had never taught English or reading at the K-12 or college level. Neither has a doctorate in English, nor published serious work on curriculum and instruction. In fact, David Coleman graduated with a BA in philosophy from Yale. Now, in fact, we still don't know who one of these people as standards writers, because the organizations that funded and developed the standards will not tell the public. Now, these standards, they stress writing more than reading at every grade level, which is a serious imbalance and to the detriment of every subject in the curriculum. This is opposite of what an academically sound reading English curriculum should contain, as suggested by a large and old body of research on development and reading skills. This research shows that reading English curriculums use deep intellectual reading to build foundations for good writing. And with reading being crucial to every aspect of a thriving society, why subject our children to an experimental teaching method? Now, Common Core also expects English teachers to spend at least half of their instructional time on informational text. This is reducing the literary study in the English class to less than 50%. Now, what are the informational texts that they are requiring them to read? In K1, wind power. That is kindergarten through first grade standards. Exemplars for grades K through 1 include informational text called Where Do Polar Bears Live? And this is, the author covers the impact of global warming on polar bears' food sources, and the last 2 pages cover climate change in even more detail, including suggestions for ways that kids can reduce their carbon footprint. Now, in grades 9 through 12, they suggest recommended levels of insulation, which was a report released in 2010 by the US EPA and the US Department of Energy. Or how about President Obama's Executive Order 13423, strengthening federal environmental, energy, and transportation management? Or the evolution of the grocery bag, where the text concludes that both paper and plastic are bad, and Americans are destroying the environment. Now, remember Sandra Stachke that Stacy just talked about? She was the validation committee member that refused to sign off on these standards. She stated that 75% of the informational text in the standards touts man-made global warming and how Americans are destroying the planet. Now, how can you foster a love for learning when you're reading manuals and articles and informational text? Great learners fall in love with reading not because of this, but because of fascinating stories. Now, with Common Core demanding that teachers teach informational text from 50 to 70% of the time-honored character-building classics will be dropped because they take larger blocks of time to teach. And with this reduction in literary study, students will have only be able to study excerpts from novels and plays and poems. For instance, it takes at least 4 to 6 weeks in an English 1 class to study Great Expectations, which is a very applicable, good, character-building book for early high school students. Now there won't be any more time to dive into this classic piece of literature. Now, the Common Core standards will no longer explicitly require cursive instruction for elementary school, although they allow states to supplement the required curriculum with cursive writing. Now, with all the computers, emails, and texting, I guess there really isn't a need for cursive writing. But this means that students will no longer be able to directly study the journals of George Washington or the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which were all written in cursive. In fact, students won't even be able to study the letters that their grandparents and great-grandparents may have saved and written for their family's history. Now, removing a student's ability to directly study American historical documents might pose serious problems for our country. Plus, studies suggest that cursive benefits students' motor skills and cognitive development. It's a necessary backup skill to technology. It can actually boost academic achievement, and it aids students with learning disabilities. Now remember, there'll be decreased time allowed in the classroom because instructional time is devoted to subjects that are included on standardized tests, and cursive writing will not be on the test. We're going to take a look at Appendix B, which is found in the back of the ELA standards. Now, Appendix B consists of books, portions of books, poems, and informational texts that serve as test exemplars. They're developed by the writers of the standards to help states choose text. Now, according to Appendix B, this is what Common Core thinks is important for your children to learn. We're going to start in the K1 standards under the poetry section. We're going to look at a few of the authors. The first is Langston Hughes, who wrote many poems, but the collected poems of Langston Hughes is on the kindergarten list. I would encourage you all to take a look at his biography and his list of works. He does not write poems for kindergartners. Richard Wright is also on the same list with the poem Laughing Boy. Please again look up his biography and his list of works. His biography states that Wright's frustration with American capitalism led him to join the Communist Party in 1932. He does not write poems for kindergartners. Now this slide that you see up on the screen is taken directly from the standards and states that starting in kindergarten they are to be reading informational texts, which include biographies and autobiographies. Please note too, this is very important, that the authors are then picked up again in grades 3 through 4, 6 through 8, and then again in high school, which suggests that these are to be themes. Now, as we started researching the books on the 9th through 11th grade reading list, there were many of great concern. Books such as Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which is a disturbing tale that includes a father raping his daughter. The crime not only occurs in the book, but it is presented from the point of view of the father. It is graphically described, and it's disgusting. Nora Zealy Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Christina Garcia, Dreaming in Cuban, where its sexually explicit content and its overt anti-Americanism prompted a school in Arizona to stop using this novel in its 10th grade literature class. David Mitchell, Black Swan Green, where a 13-year-old boy gives his description of his father's genitals, as well as his description of the sex act. Now, most of the concerning sections we cannot read to you out loud because they are so offensive. The themes of these books, and many others on the list, are very inappropriate. They use vulgar language, dumbed-down vocabulary, there are pornographic, sexually explicit content, pregnancy, abortion, anti-Americanism, racism. Now, Sandra Stotchke states that there are 40 books in the Common Core that are graphically sexual beyond what we would allow college students to read. Now, educational activist Donna Gardner states that such books are highly offensive to those who hold traditional values, such as the belief in personal responsibility, self-discipline, and respect for people. In addition, they also serve a purpose for those who are trying to indoctrinate this and future generations to hate America and to trash American exceptionalism. A steady diet of portraying ethnic racial characters as victims and saturating these books with gutter language is bound to warp students' minds. Now, you will see the Declaration of Independence on the list and the Constitution, which is good. But Dr. Terrence Moore of Hillsdale College has explained that while the Constitution is on the list, it is supplemented with a book called We the People by Linda Monk. Now, in this book, the author states how we the people didn't include women, American Indians, and African Americans. And while this is true, the book argues that the Constitution is a living document that must evolve to correct the sins of our racist, chauvinistic founders. Now, Dr. Moore also stated that according to these standards, when students study the theme of World War II, well, not so much World War II, but it's in Hiroshima, and Hiroshima told from the viewpoint of the certain Japanese people that were still in the city the morning that the bomb was dropped. No other perspective on World War II will be offered. No speeches of Churchill or from Roosevelt, no report of the liberation of Europe. Not even a word about how evil the Nazis were. And certainly not the fact that thousands of warning pamphlets were dropped on Hiroshima in an effort to get people out of the city. All the students are taught is about the horrible killing that Americans did on that forlorn group of people. Now, as directed by the standards, the nonfiction selection must be taught in a close reading process. That means that students must not be given any background information or historical significance of a nonfiction piece before reading it. For instance, the Declaration of Independence must be presented devoid of what was occurring in the United States at the time that this monumental document was written. That leaves students with a shallow understanding of the courage and the revolutionary spirit that moved the signers to voice their opposition to tyranny. Now, we've heard many times from our superintendents and principals that we would never choose this kind of material for our students to read and to study. but I want to emphasize these points and make this very clear to you. Because the Common Core Standards Initiative ties teachers' evaluations and salaries to the scores their students make on the Common Core assessments, aren't teachers going to be pressured to teach Appendix B? And what if the teacher teaches the bluest eye in a classroom? How do you fire or reprimand a teacher for teaching to the standards? Right now, the book 50 Shades of Grey is being read in classrooms in the Fairless District, which is in Navarre, Ohio, where we live. Snow Falling on Cedars is in Dover, Ohio. Both books are very similar in the nature to the ones that we listed here tonight. They're actually in your folder, too. Now, what recourse do you have as a parent when your child brings home a book that's on the National Standards copyrighted book list? And even if the local districts decided not to use the list, the company who is writing the test, Pearson, has proven time and again that they will use the subject matter in their materials and their test. Now, the local school districts cannot control what is on the test, and they aren't able to have any knowledge of what the content of the test is either. Now, a question that might be coming to mind is, what kind of people would consider sexually explicit books with themes of rape, incest, and pedophilia to be appropriate for high school English class? And if we can't trust them to recommend appropriate reading material for our children, then how can we trust them with this whole Common Core initiative system? As a parent, children not only do not become college and career ready, they don't even have a love for learning. They don't even have an understanding of their fellow men. And that was quoted by Dr. Terrence Moore. Now, as parents, we should be concerned about what kind of soul our children will have after going through this kind of stuff, and at what reading level they will be at. The most important concern is, do we still have the right to direct the values of our children? And what happens when the great American story, the story of freedom, is being undermined along with the other classics? What kind of society will we live in? As Plato once quoted, whoever controls the story controls the society.